Week 9 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 wide receivers. I'm ranking this week. Number 1, Puka Nacua of the Los Angeles Rams. Puka Nacua, he was hurt, missed Week 7's game with the hamstring injury. Week 8 had to bye. And it looks like he's going to be back this week here versus Saints. So a great matchup versus New Orleans. I can't stop anyone. And Nacua, he was the top wide receiver for the first month of the season. So this week in a great matchup, I think he goes out there and it's a good game. Number 2, Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Chase, he's back to putting up numbers he was doing last season, getting a lot of targets. Him and Joe Flacco are locked in only in a few games together with the Cincinnati Bengal team. And this week in a matchup where Chicago's defense does create turnovers and make plays, but they do give up a lot of yards. I think Chase, once again, the volume and production will be there. Number 3, Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. So JSN coming off a bye. He's putting up monster numbers all season long. This week, a good matchup with the Commanders where their defense really can't stop anyone, especially over the last couple weeks, giving up 70 points in 2 games. So this week, JSN refreshed a little bit. I think he comes out there and he has a big game. Number 4, Ramon St. Brown of the Detroit Lions, another wideout coming off a bye week. He plays better at home in terms of putting up fantasy numbers than he does on the road. And I think as a whole, for the most part, this line offense, in terms of fantasy points, put up more points at home. So this week with division rival Minnesota coming in, and their defense, believe it or not, have had some trouble stopping opposing teams. St. Brown, he's matchup proof regardless. Number 5, Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs. So he got suspended the first 6 games of the season with Rashee Rice, but already he's having a monster start to the first 2 games back in the lineup. So this week a matchup with Buffalo, 2 AFC rivals going at it. We've seen them in the playoffs a lot over the last few seasons as well. And Rashee Rice, him and Mahomes are locked in, and it seems like weekly, worst case, you're going to get at least 50 yards and a touchdown. Number 6, CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. Last week it was a down game for Dallas offensively in terms of putting up big numbers. They got blown out in Denver 44-24. But this week, a great matchup on Monday Night Football versus the Arizona Cardinals, where their defense isn't all that great. So Lamb and Dak, they've been on the same page for many seasons, making big plays. And this week, on Monday night, I think we see some big plays once again from Lamb. 7, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. Jefferson, he's having a steady season, but we just haven't seen that 30-plus point fantasy day from Jefferson. If it's any week Minnesota and fantasy owners could use, it would be this week in a matchup where they know they're going to put points on the board at the Lions. So Jefferson, like I said, it's been a steady season for him, but now J.J. McCarthy back in there, quarterback. Right through Carson Wentz at least got that football down the field, then they made big plays was Minnesota. So we'll see what he does with McCarthy this week. Number 8, Drake London of the Atlanta Falcons. Last week he was a late scratch with the hip injury, and we saw Atlanta, they couldn't move the football, do anything in that upset loss versus the Miami Dolphins. So this week they traveled to New England. The defense is playing better of late, obviously, is this New England Patriot team, but I think Drake London, if he's going to play in this game where he got scratched last second, like I said, he's going to go out there and get his numbers. Number 9, Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears. So he had some down games for the Bears in week 6 and week 7, but week 8 he bounced back with a nice ball game. Was Rome Odunze at the Baltimore Ravens. So this week a slam dunk matchup at the Cincinnati Bengals. A defense that can't stop anyone. We just saw New York Jets go in there and score 39 points on them. And Odunze easily the number 1 wide receiver in this Bears receiving room. Number 10, George Pickens of the Dallas Cowboys. So George Pickens, it's been a great season for him. And this Cowboy team, it'd be a bad idea for them to let Pickens walk. They got to try to sign him to an extension now. So him and Lamb, they're up there as the top 2 receiver combos in the league with Ja'Marr Chase, T. Higgins, obviously a great combo. And George Pickens, we saw him early in the season when Lamb was out, operate as number 1 wide receiver, put up numbers. And the last couple weeks, he's still putting up steady numbers. And this week in a good matchup on Monday night versus Arizona, I like Pickens once again to have a good game. Number 11, Davante Adams of the Los Angeles Rams. Adams, before the bye with Puka Nacua out in London versus the Jaguars, he had 3 touchdowns in that game, but not a lot of yards. But this week, a great matchup versus Saints, a defense that can't stop anyone. And Davante Adams, he's having a solid season in his first year, even though he's the number 2 wide receiver for this Ram team. Number 12, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. So it looks like Nico Collins is going to return to the lineup after he was concussed and missed last week's ball game for this Houston Texan team. And they definitely could use him, even though the offense last week I thought looked good for the first time in a long time for the Texans. versus the 49ers. Tanny's on IR. He's going to be out. And that's just going to help Nico Collins in this ball game even more. 13, Ladd McConkey of the Los Angeles Chargers. So McConkey, the first month of the season, he looked like a bust where he was going in that second, third round range. But the last 3-4 weeks now, him and Herbert are back on the same page. He's making plays, yard after catch, good possession receiver. And this week in a matchup at the Titans, that can't stop anyone. I think McConkey could go out there and put up similar numbers like he did last week with 80 yards and a touchdown. 14, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. So Pittman, Tyler Warren, two great options in this passing game. And Daniel Jones obviously has turned this franchise around where they're going out there and put points on the board early and often. And obviously Jonathan Taylor, the main man in this offense. But in the passing game, like I said, Pittman and Warren, they've been matchup problems. And this week in a matchup at Pittsburgh where their secondary have great names on it, obviously, with Jalen Ramsey, Darius Slay, but still giving up points and yards. 15 staying in the same game, DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Metcalf, he's not getting a lot of targets, but he's making the most of the small opportunities in terms of targets and plays he's getting in this offense. So this week versus Indianapolis, they know they got to put points on the board as Pittsburgh if they want to pull this ball game out. And Metcalf, it does seem like weekly, though, he's finding the end zone. And I've said it in other videos, Aaron Rodgers' number one target more times than not every season. He's going to have good fantasy value in numbers. Number 16, Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins. Waddle, since he's been the number one wide receiver, he's been solid besides one bad week for him at Cleveland, where that game was a total mess for them in Week 7 at the Browns. So right here, good matchup on paper. Baltimore coming in Thursday Night Football, where those are usually high-scoring games. And Waddle, like I said, the targets will be there or out as well. I think he's a solid receiver, too, for owners. 17, Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens. Now to get Lamar back in the lineup in a great matchup versus the depleted secondary of the Miami Dolphins, where last week I thought it was a fluke. They went into Atlanta, shut down that offense. I think Zay Flowers, he's been a solid receiver all season long. Number one option in the passing game. He's overpassed Mark Andrews this year. And I think this week in Miami, he goes out there with Lamar back and has a nice game. 18, Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. So Chris Olave, he's having a good season with the same team. Obviously, they're going to be trailing pretty much all these games. And now Tyler Shaw is going to come in as the starting quarterback where Spencer Rattler is benched. And we'll see what Shaw has as the rookie. So it's going to be a tough environment for the rookie to go into Los Angeles at the Rams where their defense is playing good. But Olave, like I said, he's been peppered with targets. He's making plays and putting up fantasy points. And he's been a solid receiver too as well for fantasy owners. 19, Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. Sutton, the numbers have gone down a little bit over the last few weeks, but this offense has been putting up big numbers, scoring over 75 points in the last two games. But those were great matchups versus the Giants and versus the Dallas Cowboys. And now on the road, this offense hasn't traveled well in terms of putting up fantasy points. So this week in a tougher matchup at Houston with Derek Stingley, one of the better corners in the league, most likely will be shadowing Sutton a majority of the game. I still think Sutton could go out there and have a decent performance. 20, Torrey McMillan of the Carolina Panthers. So besides him and Rico Dotto, there's not much going on in this offense for this Carolina Panther team. And this week they're going to be chasing points, I believe, early and often at the Green Bay Packers. And McMillan, it's been a solid season for him. And it's everything he's been advertised to be coming out as the top receiver in the NFL draft. 21, Jordan Addison of the Minnesota Vikings. Addison's been a solid receiver too on this Minnesota Viking team. Obviously getting the single coverage where teams got to roll coverage. Obviously to Justin Jefferson and Addison, more weeks than not, he's going to have some decent ball games. And this week in a matchup where they know they got to put a lot of points on the board, even though J.J. McCarthy's in their quarterback and Addison hasn't played with him this season. We'll see if Addison could go out there and get his usual type of numbers. 22, Marvin Harrison Jr. of the Arizona Cardinals. This week, a great matchup Monday night going to the Dallas Cowboys. Their secondary is depleted. Stephon Diggs hurt. Bland, he's been up and down this season. But we've seen receivers go out there and have big games weekly. We even saw Troy Franklin last week go for 6 for 89 and 2 touchdowns. So this week at Dallas, Kyler Murray should be back as well for this Cardinal team. And I think Marvin Harrison could have one of his better games of the year. 23, Travis Hunter of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Travis Hunter, they want to get him the football more. We saw finally the breakout game for Hunter in London in the blowout loss. First the Rams, 8 for 101 and a touchdown in the Week 7 loss. And this is a great matchup for Hunter to come out of the bye and versus a Vegas-rated defense that don't stop anyone. So Lawrence and Hunter working on the rapport. making the plays. And I think Hunter's upside is definitely better than Brian Thomas Jr.'s at this point of the season. 24 T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. So T. Higgins, his numbers are back to where they need to be with Joe Flacco in the lineup. In this offense, they're operating like a well-oiled machine ever since Flacco been traded to Cincinnati a few weeks ago. So this week, a good matchup versus the Bears. Secondary isn't all that great. And T. Higgins, 3 games in a row with double-digit fantasy points since Flacco's been the quarterback. 25, Deebo Samuel of the Washington Commanders. Deebo Samuel, to begin the year, he was putting up big numbers. Obviously, Jaden Daniels has been out of the lineup majority over the last month of the season. And this week in a matchup versus Seattle, where their defense has been middle of the pack this season, I think Deebo, he could go out there, yeah, could have a decent game. But like I said, early in the season, he was one of the better wide receivers in fantasy football. But he's definitely not 100% with that heel injury. He even missed, obviously, that Week 7 game at Dallas and then Week 8 at the Chiefs. He had some drop problems in that one. 26, Brian Thomas of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So he definitely fell off in the season was Brian Thomas. Where last year, he had a monster rookie season, over 1,200 yards, double-digit touchdowns. But this season, the numbers are down. I think he's scared to cross the middle at times, and he's had drop problems. But this week in a matchup, if he'll get right, it would be this week at the Vegas Raiders. One of the worst defenses in the league. 27, Stephon Diggs of the New England Patriots. Diggs, he had a couple big games early in the season, but now the last couple weeks, the numbers have been mediocre numbers for Diggs. Last week, found the end zone, his first touchdown of the season for this Patriot team. This week, a good matchup with Atlanta coming in, where we just saw the Miami Dolphins put up a lot of points on the board versus them. So I think Diggs this week versus Atlanta, solid receiver 2, 3 flex option, 28 Keenan Allen of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Keenan Allen, last couple weeks, besides that big game where they had to play catch-up versus Indianapolis in Week 7, his numbers and route participation has gone down. So this week, a matchup with Tennessee, where on paper it's a good matchup, but like I said, the ceiling isn't just that high for Keenan Allen. With Ladd McConkey back to putting up the numbers like he did last season, Rondé Gatson coming out of nowhere, one of the better tight ends in the league now over the last month of the season, and Kamini Vidal is keeping it up in the backfield in that run game. So with all those factors, Keenan Allen, his ceiling just isn't that high. Like I said, the only reason he had that big game in Week 7, they had no choice but to drop back and throw the football, coming back from 3 touchdowns. 29, Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders. So McLaurin, he's been banged up all season long. He held out for the contract, got his money, and rightfully so. And then last week, he did return to the lineup with the Chiefs, had 2 great catches, one of them for a touchdown in that one. And then in the fourth quarter, you saw him with his helmet on the sidelines, where he was banged up once again. So we'll see if McLaurin plays in this game. And this Commander team, it could be a lost season for them. But this week is an okay matchup if he plays versus Seahawks. 30, Xavier Worthy of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Worthy, he had some opportunities early in the season, but obviously got injured. And then when he was back on the field, couldn't take advantage of getting a lot of work and targets. And now with Rashee Rice back and Travis Kelce coming off a monster game, I think Xavier Worthy, his numbers are going to drop off, and he's going to be a boom or bust type of receiver, like a deep ball threat and nothing the remainder of the season. So this week in a decent matchup still with Buffalo, where I don't think their defense is all that great, and they're dealing with injuries. To me, Xavier Worthy still receiver 3 option. 31 staying in the same game, Khalil Shakir of the Buffalo Bills. Last week he found the end zone in Shakir. He's the number 1 target in this offense for this Buffalo Bill team. He could run the routes. He has great hands, and pretty much he's the only guy week in and week out that Josh Allen could trust. So this week in a matchup where he knows they got to put points on the board versus Kansas City, I think Shakir could go out there, have a decent performance. 32, Quentin Johnston of the Los Angeles Chargers. Last week he had the old goose egg was Quentin Johnston, and the week before that versus Indianapolis, if he didn't score a touchdown, it was a nothing game for him. So the last 2 weeks, like I said, this offense is shaking up a little bit. The only guy in the receiving room who's been consistent the last 3 weeks is Ladd McConkey, where Keenan Allen, he had 1 good game, 2 bad games, and Quentin Johnston 2 games in a row, not doing much. So with Rondé Gatson, like I said, emerging at the tight end position, and Vidal putting up big numbers in the backfield, Johnston and Allen are taking hits, but this week at Tennessee, I still think he could go out there and be an okay option. 33, Kayshon Boutte of the New England Patriots. So Boutte, I know he's not getting a lot of targets, but he's been a touchdown machine for this New England Patriot team. And this week, good matchup coming up. Atlanta coming in. Their defense last week got torched by the Dolphins. And like I said, Bode and May, they're locked in. Drake May, one of the better quarterbacks in all the league and one of the better deep balls in the league as well for Drake May. So this week with the Falcons coming in and Bode's finding the end zone and at least having a big play or two per game, I still like him as a flex option. 34, Juwan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. Brandon Ayuk still not ready to come back. Ricky Pearsall, he's been out for multiple weeks now. I'm not counting on him to come back in this game. And it's pretty much down to Juwan Jennings, Kendrick Bourne, and Demarcus Robinson, the top receivers in the receiving room. So Jennings last week, it wasn't a great game, but he's going to get targeted if it's Brock Purdy returning or Mac Jones in the offense. But obviously this offense is going to run through Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle. So he's a low-end option, even in a good matchup at the Giants. 35, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions. So coming off a bye, I think they're going to find more ways to get Jameson Williams in space. It's been a down year for J-Mo. Last season was a big year for him, but he's another wide receiver that's boom or bust. Either a deep ball or nothing type of ball games for J-Mo. But every few weeks he goes out there, has a good game. So like I said, coming off a bye week, in a matchup versus a leaky Minnesota secondary that especially 2 weeks ago versus the Philadelphia Eagles, we saw them get that football down the field and make explosive plays, where I think this could fit in with Williams this week in the 36th and final receiver on rankings. Darius Slayton of the New York Giants is Slayton on a tic-tac call, got called for offensive passing interference last week, or would have been a 75-yard touchdown where he would have had a big day. So Slayton, a veteran receiver on this Giant team. Obviously, Neighbors, he's been out for the season. Wendell Robinson, more of a slot receiver underneath guy. So I think Slayton could step up. I know last week it was a nothing game for him, 2 catches, 26 yards. But this week versus a banged-up secondary of San Francisco, I think Slayton, with a week back last week, and like I said, should have had that 75-yard touchdown. Could be a sneaky back-end 3 receiver or flex option for owners this week versus San Francisco. So that's the top 36 wide receivers I'm ranking for week 9 of the fantasy football season.